Hi, this is a reflection on lesson 254 in A Course in Miracles that says, "Let every voice but God's be still in me. Let every voice but God's be still in me." So this one really was making the distinction between our ego thoughts and our thoughts of intuition, basically. I don't know what, they didn't say the word intuition, but that's what this kind of made me think of, because it also, the interesting part of this was it went through the whole lesson, and at the end it said, like, listening for God's voice is also when you hear God speak of your will, like what is our will? Like our own, not motivation or drive. It's kind of like that though. So it's like what we should actualize for ourselves, basically. So I thought that was interesting because it's saying there's a distinction between ego and our own deepest intuition, right? It's like the thoughts from up here versus the thoughts from here. That's how, the one way to break it down. And then at the end, it's talking about how the voice of God is our own voice. So those two things that we think of maybe as separate are actually one. Whereas, and I think of it as God's voice is our intuitive voice. Those are the same. And so, and that God's voice, our intuition, is separate from our ego thoughts. And I think about this a lot because it's like, how do I keep tapping into that intuitive space? And it really is silencing thought. That's really what it comes down to, at least for me at this point, is like I can tell the difference between all this mess, all of this chaos, and then something that rings deeper and more authentic, truer, in every sense. Like when I tap into intuition, it's like there's no doubt. When I'm only thinking from here and having these thoughts, ego thoughts, it's all doubt. Well, a lot of doubt. Like, can it even be trusted? Like, where is this taking me? These thoughts really don't, it's really what I recognize now is like they don't lead me anywhere important or fruitful or meaningful. Like those thoughts are always hit a dead end, if that makes sense. Like in the sense of like, they're like an end unto themselves. They don't open any doors. They actually don't lead to deep curiosity of, remember how we were talking about yesterday or the day before, one of these days, how that deep drive to keep going, to keep growing, is really that intuitive voice. And that actually does lead further along on the path. Whereas these thoughts, they don't lead further along on the path. They usually keep us ruminating on and keep us from moving forward, or the growth that we're being confronted with on our true path is a little painful, so maybe we get stuck here for a while, and that's fine. It happens, and then we're ready to move on. So that's just a bunch of noise to say I really liked this lesson because it talked about the difference between this voice, and that actually God's voice is this voice. And I've heard other people talk about that too. They're like, how do you know what, like people who are tapping into like higher wisdom, like, oh, my guides, my angels, my higher self, like whatever all of that is. It's a lot of people who get real like down to it will say, because people ask them, well, what does that voice sound like? And they're like, it sounds like my voice. Like, that's like, to be able to trust your voice, it sounds like you. And then if you want to get a little woo woo about, I don't even like that word, but I don't know how else to say it that sums it up nicely, because I don't like the word spiritual for that. If you want to get a little metaphysical, maybe that's the word. If you want to get a little metaphysical, all of these, we need like in some things that I'm starting to resonate with more, like guides, angels, like all these, there's like a million different things, right? Beyond the human. Other dimensions, beings from other dimensions, from other planets, aliens, like all of these things that people are channeling when they tap into wisdom beyond the human mind, beyond the human soul, even, is they're all whatever our unique path is what we're going to call it, right? Because like because it's different for everyone. Some people do align with this thing called angels. That means something to them. Some people align with like beings from other dimensions, my future self 5,000 years from now, like there's all sorts of things coming in that speak in our voice, that help, that are our intuition. And sometimes it's what these people are saying is that, I know this is getting weird, but this is what I think about when I think about, well, where is it coming from when I channel different wisdoms, if you want to call them wisdoms, different things that ring really true. Like there's just no doubt. I have no doubt about it, which feels like a wisdom of some sort. I'm like, where's it coming from? I don't think in terms of guides. I don't think in terms of angels. I don't think in terms of other beings from other dimensions. None of that resonates with me at this point in my journey. What I do tap into is like some unknown thing, and maybe it's because for me, my authentic self really loves the unknown. It really loves not being so strict with definitions. So maybe my higher wisdom is coming in the form of I don't know, and I don't have to know. It's just like it's almost like I think I would align better with the idea of this quantum field, maybe because I like science so much. So I think what for me, though, if I were to have a higher self kind of wisdom coming through, or channeling some other beyond the human, whatever entity that is, it would be tapping into the quantum field of, there's a place where everything is connected, everything exists. There's the wisdom and the history and the information from all times and all places that you can access. It's all there. It's like a catalog. Some people refer to it as the Akashic Records. And I'm like, okay, to me, that's just the field of all knowledge of everything, that everything is born into existence from. And so there's that energetic information, if you just want to call it that. And it might also be because when the internet started coming around, because I'm pretty old, so when the bubble was happening back in the late 90s, the most fascinating, because you got to follow your fascination. What are you so curious about? What are you so interested in that you could just follow it, and it's just so fascinating to you? To me, it was, I want to build databases. I loved figuring out how to build a database and how information could be most efficiently organized and tied together and then retrieved, stored, queried, retrieved, and then fed into some interface. What that led to was me going down a whole career path for the first several years of getting into more development. And I was always the middle person I worked with the developers who were like coding stuff, and I was working with the front end designers who were like designing stuff, and I was the middle person saying, I'm gonna hook up the back end and feed it to the front end, which was a whole separate layer of code and database queries and the whole thing. I loved that more than anything. It was so fun and fascinating. And there's something deep in me, and I go back to childhood even. I was like, when I followed that thread, and this is where I talk to people about follow those breadcrumbs. Like, what was it that when you were little, that you could have done forever? Like, just, do you have anything that you were just so into of your own design, meaning no one planted that seed in you? Maybe they did and then you were off and running, but that you could have just done forever. And then I followed that back forward through my adult life. I'm like, yeah, it was like definitely following my fascinations since childhood. And it all had to do with, a lot of it had to do with organization and retrieval of information, even from when I was a kid, because this is all related to the lesson, I swear. Or maybe I just had a few minutes to kill since I had a client cancel. So maybe, but anyway, I just love thinking about this stuff. So thanks for coming along on this journey. For me personally, a little story time since I have extra minutes. When I was a kid, my mom still teases me. She was like, you would do your homework twice. Well, that's a whole separate thing. But I think if I really put myself back in that, it was like retracing the steps of the information. So there's part of the process was like doing the work of the first time around. And then the second time was like, how can I make it more efficient? Like, how can I, what other truths can I get out of this? Versus, because and also checking my work, and just also maybe I was just bored. But the other thing that I think about is my mom worked in an office while I was young. And she would bring home office supplies for me, like manila envelopes with the routings on it. Remember in a big company when you would route things by paper envelope, by manila envelope, like take it to this floor to this person, and then you'd stick it in the mail. Well, she would bring those home for me and all kinds of other office supplies, and I'd set up a little desk and I would play office by myself, and I was always organizing my files and putting stuff in files and like getting information out. And then I fast forward to my adult life, and of course I'm building databases. Of course I'm hooking it up so people can retrieve information really fast and efficient. And the thing was, I already knew they didn't care what the database looked like. They didn't care where it was coming from. They just needed quick, reliable access. Fast forward even more, I was working for and leading a company, or the commercial side of the company. We had an R&D side and the commercial side, and I was helping lead the commercial side, meaning we put all the R&D to work for commercial clients. So, but it was machine learning. It was a machine learning company when I lived in Los Angeles. Story time. And how did I get into that? I don't know, but I did. I just followed my fascinations. And when I was there like 2 years, it was the longest I ever worked anywhere, because that's how fascinating it was. The R&D people would build, they came out of like USC, because I was in Southern California, the Information Sciences Institute, where all the like leading cutting edge stuff was coming out of at the time in the early 2000s. And they were building machine learning algorithms. This is a precursor to AI. Isn't that crazy? And now I use AI to be like, stupid stuff. Even though I was on the leading edge of like that whole thing back in the day, like 2005. And we were like training the data. We'd gather tons of data from websites, and that was before websites had a lot of data. I can't even believe we were able to do it, because thinking about 20 years ago what websites were like, they were messy. The back ends were like atrocious because people were handwriting code, and yet somehow we made it work, and we gathered tons of data. And the government was one of our biggest, I think I'm past an NDA now. The government was one of our biggest customers of this data. And then all kinds of other other organizations were also wanting this data. And the reason that we were tied up with all the people who need to know information is because we had the most efficient way to go gather it in mass and then build databases of all this data and feed it back to them. So for some reason, my whole path has been about that. And so fast forward to now, I'm getting on the metaphysical side where I've gone away from technology, away from business. Well, I'm still running a business, but like away from technology and doing 180 into like healthcare, basically, human connection versus like data connection, I guess. And then sure enough, when I got into this, I'm skipping a bunch of parts, tapping, then was able like to tap into my intuition. So going from like physical data to metaphysical data, and it was like, it's all the same process. And I've been grooming myself for this since I was a little kid. Why? I don't know. That's why when I think about where information comes from and I've played with it, I'm like, guides, angels, whatever. I'm like, no, doesn't resonate for me. I'm not hearing anything from anywhere outside me. When I tap into inside me, that's when I start to find information, if that's what you want to call it. So that's maybe why my path is unique to me, and that's why my inner voice, that my God voice, my intuitive voice, the voice where the information comes from, sounds just like it always has in my life. And it doesn't get very woo-woo in terms of like calling it something other than what I authentically think it is. And I think it is just my voice. It's my what do you want to call it? My channel into the, I almost said Ethernet, but it's my, whatever cord of like my fiber optic cable into that quantum space where all information exists. Does that make sense? So if you're somebody who maybe didn't have my background, but you were able to sense angelic energies, and like maybe the word angel means something to you because you were kind of primed for that since a young age. Well, I wasn't. Not that I know of. And guides, I don't even know what, like spirit guides, I've tried to tap into that. And there's so many people that are like, well, we all have guides. And it's like, well, mine feel pretty silent, right? And maybe that's by design. If I have a team, maybe my path was like, no, girl, trust your own voice. Trust your own voice. Because I've always been one to second guess. So what I'm saying is all of this leads me back to thinking about the thing I love to think about most, which is what makes us each unique on this unique journey we're on. If you're here, you're probably on some metaphysical spiritual journey with me to keep tapping into intuition, to keep exploring beyond this physical world to see what we can learn. And it's like we each have a unique history with unique, I want to say impulses, like my impulses to like what was interesting to me. What's interesting to you? Those are different things. And it leads us to take the next step towards our fascinations. And those are, I think, little breadcrumbs we've left for ourselves, right? That lead us to the unfolding of our unique paths. And the way that we gather information along that path. Maybe we only gather information from books because we love this physical world. We don't need to think about things we can't see, right? Me personally, I love thinking about things I can't see. And like I said, having a deep value for people not even caring where that information lives or what's happening behind the curtain in that database and the code that connects the database to the front end. Like, I loved being a facilitator of that. And I had a deep respect and for my customers to make it so squeaky clean, efficient, and smooth of a process that they would never have to worry about how it was done. And so to me, that leads me to, then I'm so happy to think about this, because I'm like, that makes my whole life make perfect sense. My whole life. It's just exactly by design, exactly how it should be. I'm exactly where I'm meant to be, doing exactly what I'm doing. Not worrying. It helps me not worry about what's next, because I'm always like, what's next? But it helps me settle down a bit and be like, it'll be revealed when it needs to be revealed. I'm meant to know what I'm meant to know when I'm meant to know it. And it's been that way my whole life. Why would I try to rush the process like I have for 48 years? So I'm finally getting to that point of trusting that, of course, it makes sense. Of course. Okay, that was a long reflection, but I swear it was all related to that voice of ours. Our most deeply authentic voice really is the voice of creation. It's the voice of everything that we come from, which is that void of all potential. Bye.